Jessica, Susan, thanks so much for joining us. Jessica, you, Michael, and I, we've spoken plenty over the past couple of years. Susan, we met you so briefly it almost doesn't count on the red carpet at the Beacon Theater. So it's great to actually sit down with you and meet you for real. And of course, get a lot of the backstory to this documentary, because as much as we saw, even as we were watching this unfold, I know at least I was, and I think Michael was too, forming questions for this inevitable interview where we were just like, well, how are they doing this back there? What's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about? And it's very exciting that we're going to finally be able to get the full picture.
Well, thank you. We're delighted to be here.
Well, let's take this back even before this documentary. Susan, you just mentioned you and Jessica have been working together for 20 years. What's that relationship been like? And can you tell me about some of the recent projects leading up to this one?
I created a series on public television in 1986 called American Masters, and I ran it for 30 years. And at some point along the way, 25 years ago, Jessica entered my life when I started directing films. I didn't direct very many while I was at American Masters because it didn't seem appropriate, but I directed 6 or 7 films, and Jessica was with me on almost all of them. That included Joni Mitchell, David Geffen, Judy Garland. I think you weren't there for Leonard Bernstein.
That is a sadness for me.
And then after 10 years of effort, this is a whole other podcast, of calling Jeff Rosen once a month for 10 years, I finally got the call that Dylan might be ready for us to make a film. I had already been working with Jessica, and I saw what an incredible producer she was. And so I asked her to come on that huge project that we ended up doing with Spitfire Pictures. And we did the definitive Dylan, well, up to the motorcycle accident that Marty Scorsese directed. No direction. I produced it, and I brought Jessica in to basically line produce it and make sure that everything was going along splendidly. I was poached by HBO to come over there and make films, and it was wrenching to do because American Masters was in my blood, but it was time after 30 years to try something new, and I didn't want to fundraise anymore. And I said to Jessica and Emma Pildas, who's our third partner, I can't do this without you. So if I go, can you make a commitment to me? And they said, okay. And I asked for a 5-year commitment, and that was 12 years ago. And since then, I've directed 3 films, Spielberg, Jane Fonda in 5 Acts, Ralph Lauren, and Jessica was absolutely ready to step into the co-director place, and I'm delighted that happened. We had so much fun doing this, and I think we're going to be a directing partnership for a long time. Then we also did a film called The Janes, which Emma Pildas, our third partner, directed and Jessica produced. So we've been very busy.
Meeting Susan and
Joni the first?
Joni Mitchell. And she said, I'm artist is so important to me, and I am, really need a strong producer to come and work with me. And I was just blown away because Joni Mitchell's one of my heroes too. And we really connected over that artistically and just spiritually, I would say, about our shared kind of musical ethos. And I think that was a great launching place for our partnership. And also, I am just so grateful to Susan because she's such a master of this genre. There are many reasons why this Billy Joel film came into our orbit, but the main one is Susan's reputation as a filmmaker that's sensitive to artists and letting artists' stories unfold in the unique way that they need to for a particular film. That is why, Billy Joel and team entrusted Susan to tell Billy's story. They knew that she would look to find the true artist in Billy. And I am so proud of that because I think she really found a way into Billy in a way that no one else would have. And I'm grateful that she brought me in to co-direct. And I think part of that was just because this was such a massive undertaking that it was wonderful to have 2 people. But I just wanted to take a moment to say that a 25-year mentorship is not light work. And I am just so grateful, to have had that path to follow.
Well, Jess brought an enormous amount to this project. To this film. Number one, she really knew Billy Joel's music in a way that I did not. And she had a passion for it. And passion goes a long way. We can't do these films without passion. In fact, if you don't have passion, you might as well not do it, because you're just going to get a drive-by, in Wikipedia kind of film.
Sure.
Jess and I have been spiritually and emotionally and, connected for such a long time that we really we came at this film from different places. For me, it was discovery. It was a complete discovery for me. And Jessica really knew the catalog, but I think we were so aligned in our goals, which was to serve the music and to find the artist within that. And that was always the most important thing. If it didn't serve the music, it wasn't going to be in this film. I mean, I did a lot of interviews with Billy. At first, he was a little tentative, and then he became more trusting, and I think understood that we were making something that probably he hadn't experienced before. Other films that he had done, he just had to show up and say a few things. But that this was a serious legacy piece, if not, if you want to look at it that way, that was going to stand the test of time. And he realized that he needed to come to the table.
Just because someone's sitting in the seat does not mean that they are going to come forward with the goods that you need to tell this kind of story. I really was just amazed, because even for someone who was going on a journey of discovery as she was into Billy's music, which I think brought a lot to the project, because she had more of a bird's eye view of, what does this mean, in our greater culture, and, where does Billy kind of fit in? Billy at the beginning, as Susan said, he's so used to doing his sort of Billy routine. What would we call that, Susan? Kind of like the shtick, his like, oh, why are you making a film about me? Blah, 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 and humor and self-deprecation and all that stuff. But somehow Susan got under his skin, and slowly, over the course of a bunch of interviews, he finally realized, like, whoa, okay.
He said, you go deep, don't you? And there's an additional element here of one of the reasons that I connected so quickly to Billy is we have a shared family history. My mother was a concert pianist. His father was a classical pianist. Our fathers came from Germany to get away from Hitler in the same year, 1937. They both became American soldiers and went back to Germany as American soldiers. My father in intelligence, his father was in infantry. And we both have, a Holocaust background. That was actually the very first interview that we did, because I thought that'll break some ground here, because, he could talk about that informationally, because he didn't experience it, but he learned it along the way and what that meant to him. And then the second interview we did was all about classical music. And that sort of broke some ice, because that was a lot of fun. And then we began the process of, unpacking Billy's story and getting there.
When were you approached about this project? How did this all come together?
I wanted to do something in American Masters, and that didn't go anywhere. And then I reached out. I can't remember who reached out, whether Steve Cohen reached out to me or I reached out to Steve Cohen. But one day, I live in the Hamptons at that time, not full time, because that was before the pandemic. And he has a house out here. And he came over, and we started, he brought a bunch of, we just connected. We really did connect and like each other a lot. But it didn't go anywhere. And I can't remember, it was probably about 5 years ago. And it didn't go anywhere at that time, because I don't think they were quite ready. And he had a multi-platform plan, that he wanted to do that would include something that was dramatic and, the last concert at Madison Square Garden, and it all come together at once. And that didn't happen. And then I got a call from Sony. You ever wanted to make a film? And I said, well, sure, if you can make it happen, but I'm already talking to Steve Cohen and people. Then I got a call from Playtone, Gary Ketzman and Tom Hanks's company, asking if I wanted to direct a film about Billy Joel. And I was like, okay, this is destiny. This is supposed to happen. That's when we got started. They had an arrangement over at HBO, and I had an arrangement. Our company had an arrangement there. So it came together at that point very quickly.
This was during the pandemic, or the very end of the pandemic. They were coming back together for the first time to do their first concert at Fenway Park. Because they hadn't been together for over a year, I think at that point, they had to rehearse. Susan and I were just like, well, God, we really have to be there to cover this, because it's the first time they're seeing each other. We'll get to meet the band and blah, blah, blah. But it was a little premature, and I don't think would have started shooting that quickly, but it was an opportunity.
First of all, it was just fun to meet all the band in that circumstance and to watch them goof around and rehearse. And I think we've got some nice stuff as a result of it. But I certainly wasn't ready to start doing interviews on at that point. I do a lot of research and thinking and preparing before that. Jessica's a huge help on that for me as well. And
Well,
it was fun.
we got great footage, and it's the first really seen in the documentary, which is them rehearsing in Lidditz, Pennsylvania.
You guys know about Lidditz?
Yeah.
About
Yes.
I
Yes.
drove past
Oh,
it and
it's
drooled.
this
Yes.
enormous sort of, modern, institution in the middle of Amish country, with the
It's
Amish
incredible.
wagons going by it.
Yeah.
I thought it was extremely funny. We did, I wanted to get a shot of the Amish wagon. I thought that was going to play a bigger role in the film at one point. And we did actually get that shot, but we didn't use it.
No, and I can understand wanting to at least capture those moments. They haven't toured on a record in 35 years, so they're not pre-production tour rehearsals. That's not something they do anymore. So you had one shot to capture that type of interaction.
And it was a lot of fun to watch their warm-ups and, before they start playing Billy's songs. What do you have a term that I guess I never heard before? But
ABD, anything but Billy.
Yep.
He wants to play anything but Billy, and he doesn't like to rehearse. And it was just fun. I mean, he was playing all these oldies, and then they kind of get where he's going, and then they add in, and then the guitars come in, and Tommy Burns starts picking up on it, and they just have a lot of fun.
he would be rehearsing and be like, okay, let's run this. Okay, let's run this. And be like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go listen to it from the back.
I mean, there was a film crew there, and it probably felt a little strange to all
Yeah.
of them.
I loved how that's how you set the stage with him talking with you all. The elephant in the room of him being uncomfortable on camera.
He is uncomfortable on being on camera, but I think because we had so many of them, he kind of got used to it. Maybe when he was doing the memoir and he was talking to the writer on that, he spent time, but I don't think he's ever spent time on camera with the same person as much as we did. And that makes a difference over time. It's like any relationship.
It was a good choice starting how you did with the classical music, because I know when it comes to media and press in general, he's not asked about that often, and he loves it.
We love a lot of the same music. I mean, I grew up with the music he loves, with my mother playing it. So it was a real connection.
Was there a specific moment, especially for you discovering so much of Billy's music and doing the research, was there like one specific moment where you honed in on the thesis for the film or the angle, or is it something that developed over time?
There were many things, but I think if I had to pick one thing that I felt was probably a huge key to Billy was the effect of the absence of his father and the abandonment by his father of him at a critical age when he was just beginning to understand that he had some musical talent, who his father did not recognize it one bit, wasn't even nice about it. Those things stay with you. I just sensed that was a deeper issue than he was talking about or even wanted to talk about. When I did that interview with Howard Stern, which he insisted on doing in his studio, so we didn't use it on camera because it looked like it was his interview,
Sure.
not our interview.
Yeah.
Without my even going there, he said, Billy's story is way deeper psychologically than he wants to know. And a lot of it is he thinks his drive was about trying to connect with his father through music. And that is exactly what I thought. So doing this interview, and I thought, oh my God, I didn't even have to take him there. He went there himself. So there must be something there. And I think Billy at the end of this film recognized it too. I mean, he actually said, and in the end, we didn't have it in the film. And Jessica and I tried so hard to get it in there.
What?
When he said, I spent my whole life thinking it was about my father, but it was really about my mother.
Oh.
It was really my mother.
Really moving.
It was so moving. And somehow the way we had to restructure some things, because, it was very fat at one time. The film was very fat. We had to bring it down. And we had these list of things. Oh my God, we're losing that. How do we get it in? We're losing that. How do we get it in? But that didn't get in. But when he said that, I thought, oh my God, that's so meaningful. He said, I always thought it was about my father, but at the end of the day, it was really about my mother, who was always there.
Wow.
And his father wasn't. So childhood has a huge effect on people, and it lasts for your whole life. So I think in some ways, this film allowed him to kind of acknowledge, to look at his life in a way that probably hadn't before. I don't think he likes to be very self-reflective.
His mother was a complex woman. I think that he struggled with how that relationship manifested, and I think that, yes, she was a champion and she was there and she made sure he had those piano lessons and she recognized that he had talent. But because I think the relationship was a little fraught and a little complex, maybe he didn't have that realization
Right.
until after his father died.
He says sometimes she drove me crazy, because she was unstable.
Well, if you go and listen to the lyrics to Laura, that's the dark side of their relationship. And
Speaking about Laura, that's a perfect segue to talking about how Billy's songs are autobiographical. Billy's songs are very much ripped from the headlines of his own life, right? And we know that much more now, having put this film together and putting all the stories together, and you can see what a correlation there is. But the Laura one, I mean, I don't think people really realized that song was about his mother. I don't think people knew who that song was about. They just knew it was about a relationship. But Billy tends to really put those punchy emotions into his songs. They might be over the top. They may not be exactly what happened in real life. But boy, you can relate.
Speaking too about the fact that you couldn't get that line in particular, but you had all this footage. His solo career alone spans more than 50 years, and you had access, of course, to the Billy Joel archive, which we know from talking with John Jackson is vast, and we just picture it as the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. What was it like? What like?
Sorry.
I snuck that one right in there.
Good metaphor, Jack.
Without the ghost of the Nazis, but
Yeah.
Right,
See, it all ties right back,
Floating up.
Yeah. What was it like sifting through all this material, what you had gotten, what you had access to? How do you make sense of that, even from just a practical standpoint?
I think we have to give a lot of chops to our editors here. We had 3 wonderful editors. I know that I didn't look at every piece of archive footage because it's thousands of hours of it, but I think they did. And I think when we showed very late in the game, we showed some cuts to Steve Cohen
And John Jackson.
and they would say, well, there's a better version of this than that, because they knew it in a way that we could never know it the way it was, particularly Steve knew it. And that was very helpful, so we could say, oh, there's a better performance of this one, or there's but the editors sifted. I mean, they had an outline, they created an outline at the beginning and at the end of the day, I was surprised at how closely the structure of the film was actually to the original outline. But they had an outline, but they had to really sift through. I don't know, Jessica, you may have looked at the 1,000 hours, but I know I did not.
We're always looking for those magic moments and those moments that are going to really, a film will turn on, whether it's the footage of Home Run when they're all sitting there introducing themselves. We knew we wanted to get that footage in because it's just so special and it's so of a moment, and there's nothing else like it. So as we were going along and we were screening things, we would be that moment we have got to get in, whether it's maybe, I'm thinking of there's a couple moments in the Sparks, that black and white concert footage.
My favorite one.
Where he's goofing around and looking at the camera or doing this or doing that. And, or let's say, Susan, that hilarious footage of him backstage with the guys where, that blonde reporter whose name I can't remember right now is interviewing them and they're goofing around and Billy says, Liberty says, I was driving the car, when they're talking about the motorcycle accident. Those little gems, along the way. Yes, performances are complicated because there are a lot of them. And we had to figure out what's the best one, what's the best quality, how many different versions are there of whatever the song is. I mean, if you take a song like Los Angelinos, I mean, there's like one performance of it. So we knew if we wanted to use that song, that was going to be the performance we were going to use. But then there are others, especially as you get into the more contemporary era, where we had to kind of figure out what the best, which was the best performance, or to illustrate a particular point. It was especially challenging for us on this project just because it was so vast and to try to hone down and find, the things you want. And also just say eek, there's something we just can't fit in, even as much as we love it.
One of the things that I wanted to have in the film, and it ended up not being in the film, is Billy can, as you know, imitate anybody. I mean, he can be Rod Stewart. I mean, he can be Joe Cocker. He can be Robert Plant. He could be Bob Dylan. His Bob Dylan is hysterical. And I thought that would have been a funny sequence in the film, but somehow the film took a different turn, and that would have been inappropriate, actually. We couldn't figure out how to get that in. We also wanted this film to feel cinematic and not just be a collection of archive and performance and interviews and so forth. We had access to, I think I can say this, to Billy's unpublished memoir. The opening scene, its opening shot with the drone going over the water up to the house, that's a story he told me the first time we met. And I don't know if it's appropriate for this podcast, but it turned out that I had read that morning that we were meeting. And I don't think he was really looking forward to this meeting. He came in with his hat and didn't look up. And I told him we had a small world story. And because I had read just that morning, I don't know, the gods were with me, that house was the childhood home of Rosalind P. Walter. Rosalind P. Walter was my major funder at American Masters. I mean, not the major one, but the first one. And she stayed with it for 30-some years. And he said, "Did you know that she was Rosie the Riveter, the model for Rosie the Riveter?" And I said, "Yes, I did know that." And that we were off to the races after that. So little things like that can happen. But I wanted that story because I thought it was such a wonderful story that, I own that house now. But I never had intended to really start the film that way until I got a call from Steve Cohen saying, "Billy thinks it would be fun to shoot something in that house." And I said, "Well, isn't it under construction?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Went and took some pictures." And I kind of had a vision with the scaffolding in the background. I said, "I think we can make that work." But I had to come up with a reason to be in the house. So that's where, house isn't finished yet, but neither am I.
Right.
But the next thing you hear is the opening of his memoir. The most original thing I've done in life is screw up. And the very last thing you hear is the last thing in his memoir.
And that brings up a good question. You had almost unprecedented access to Billy, to his archive, to his team, to all these materials. This is something we sort of hear about a little now, where artists are like executive producers on their own biopics or documentaries or whatever. For you as an objective filmmaker, how do you strike that balance when you come across things that you imagine or know that the subject, and Billy in particular, isn't going to want to have out there? Is that hanging over your head that, like, did this access might get cut, or how does that happen?
We'd love to make very clear that this was a totally independently made film. I mean, Billy did not see this film till it was finished. His team didn't see it till it was really, 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 really far along. And the first thing he said to me when I asked him, "Are there any sensitivities here that I should be aware of?" I said, not that I was necessarily not going to go there, but I wanted to know what they were. And he said, "Susan, tell the truth." And I said, "That's God, my witness." That's exactly what he said. And we stuck with that. We told the truth. Did we go for the jugular every single time? Did we show every single car accident? No, we didn't, because we're sensitive people. But I don't think we steered away from anything that we thought needed to be, that served the music and served the story. And he didn't ask, when he saw it, he didn't ask for anything. Not one single thing did he ask to be changed. Amazing. But we have never made a film where the subject is in any way involved. They always sign something saying that they see it as editorial control. And I know that that's a really big topic of conversation right now about the number of film biographies and portraits that are made by the subject or made by a relative of the subject. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but so far we have not had that experience, and we're very lucky.
Susan has had that point of view and that stance from the very beginning at American Masters. It's not just the films we're doing now. It's going all the way back to when she committed to creating this cultural library, which is what American Masters was about. These are not cookie cutter films. Each film needs to be molded to who that individual is. So if an artist were to come in and say, "Well, I want this and I want that," well, that wouldn't really allow you to let the story lead and to create a piece of art that is fitting for that subject. So we have been committed to that. Please, God, watch over us. Let us be able to do that again. It is getting harder and harder to do in this climate, but we, have been able to do it. And I really do, in my heart and in my brain, know that that is the way to get the best film. It is not to have somebody looking over your shoulder, because if they do, even if it's not perceptible, you know that you're going to be influenced by that pressure. And, you know, it was very courageous of Billy to say that to Susan, tell the truth. He could have said a lot of different things. The Billy team was certainly familiar with Susan's work and understood that she was a sensitive filmmaker who understood artists. And that, I think, is something that makes people feel trusting and comfortable to go on the journey, you know, whatever that journey is going to be. It's really courageous of Billy in it. And I do think that the result speaks for itself.
So many people inside the team and inside the camp, whether it be people at Columbia Records or band members throughout the years or different folks, you know, were living it. How important was that to the story? And were there any people that you were hoping to get their perspective that just didn't pan out?
Everybody that we asked to do an interview did an interview with one exception, and that was Elton John. And I don't know why. Maybe he was just busy. He was working on his own film. But we chose the well-known musicians, each one for good reasons. And I mean, obviously Paul McCartney was a huge influence on Billy and an admirer of his. And Bruce, they've always been compared in some ways, contrasted, you know, Long Island, New Jersey, both working class guys, Bruce getting more rock and roll chops than Billy. But he can speak to that, and having that come from Bruce to talk about why Billy had problem with the critics and who didn't think he was rock and rolly enough meant something to come from Bruce Springsteen. Sting was just a really big fan and a good close friend and a very really respected musician. He brought a particular perspective. Jessica brought Nas in, and which I thought was a brilliant addition to the film. We didn't go wide. Don Henley, because he's a good friend, and they had suffered, you know, together with some of the critical, you know, critics not loving them.
Nas is such an unexpected person.
Yeah, that was
A lot of people have said, Nas, whoo, interesting. Which, I mean, it's a funny story because we really, when we started to research, because Susan and I are always very interested in how that artist fits into the wider kind of cultural landscape. And so I was sort of doing a little research and was like, oh, you know, Billy's songs have been sampled a lot in rap. You know, we should really talk about that in the film. We just thought it would be like an interesting little cul-de-sac or whatever. And well, it turned out that we couldn't quite make that work in the film, but it turned out that Nas had a lot of great things to say anyway. And we had no idea that he was so poetic and eloquent about Billy. And he turned out to be a really wonderful addition and is such a heartfelt musician and so observant.
Speaking on the music aspect of things in the film, and, you know, we've talked with Brad Lee several times over the years, and he mixed over 80 pieces specifically for the film, whether it was an instrumental mix, 5.1 mixes of some of these songs, or some master tapes that had gotten unearthed, Cold Spring Harbor, The Lost Souls, different things. How important was that, and how did that feel to have such fresh music to draw from the film?
What a gift. As a person who was a fan and knew the music well, just to have the ability to hear these outtakes and these in-process pieces from the studio. We worked really hard early on to bring Sony into our process and to impress upon them that we really wanted to be definitive and that we really wanted to dig deep into their archives. And boy, that's not always easy with a record company. Let me just say that. They're not exactly like, come on in, open the door.
right.
But they were wonderful. And Brad and John worked very closely with Sony to be able to pull out of the archives the pieces that we were seeking. We really wanted to tell the story of Cold Spring Harbor and the making of Cold Spring Harbor as completely as we could to kind of shed actual truth and light on what happened from Billy's experience. And that required us to have session audio so that we could hear and understand. So it wasn't all just mythology and, you know, people's Rashomon memories of the time, but that we actually had true recordings from that moment. So that's just one example of, you know, why we were so blessed and happy to have that material. But just for a second to sing Brad's praises, Susan and I decided very early on, once we realized, and even for me, who knew the catalog really well, once we realized what the breadth of Billy's catalog was in terms of the variety of music, the influences, the classical music, the instrumental music. We realized that we were going to build this score of this film, all 5 hours, out of Billy Joel's music. That was not always easy, but we did achieve it, and we're really proud of that. There are 121 songs in Billy's catalog, and we have over 110 songs in the film. And I do think it's a gift for people to revisit a lot of that deep catalog that they haven't heard in a long time, and they sort of say, ooh, wait a minute, that's a Billy Joel song? You know, I've had forgotten about that, and that was really like a pleasure to work in and to figure out. But Brad, because we decided to do that, we needed a lot of instrumentals. We needed a lot of things where we were like, oh, well, here we only want to hear the vocals because it really kind of makes sense in this moment. And then Brad would dig in, he would pull it out, he would, pull out the 16 track, he would make it, happen. And he did it quickly, he did it efficiently, no muss, no fuss. It was really just incredible. And he would just hand us these things and we would just receive them. Another example of that is the making of Just the Way You Are. Hearing Phil Ramone.
Yeah.
I love that.
Wasn't
I
it?
can't
Things
believe they
happen
still
in
have
here
it.
in the control room here too,
Yeah.
Phil Ramone was an amazing character. I got to know him when we made a film. Forgot about Paul Simon. That we made a film about Paul Simon. But I also wanted to add that early on, I didn't know we would carry it all the way through the film. But I asked a couple of musicians who have worked with Billy if they could create instrumental variations on Vienna, one that would sound very Jewish, one that would sound very Viennese, and one that could potentially be the father theme. And they knocked it out of the park immediately and enabled us to edit that whole sequence with Vienna vaguely in the background, but kind of knew it. And then we realized that we could do that with a number of other things. So when there was a song that seemed emotionally correct for a particular moment, but we didn't want the lyrics, and we didn't want it to be totally spot on, they would create a version of it for us. So that enabled the entire score of this film to be Billy.
Except Led Zeppelin and...
Yeah, but that's...
I mean, just some of the songs that Billy sings in the
Moonlight
studio.
Sonata.
Right.
Sure.
Stuff like that.
Doing it, yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. But I was going to say the main ones, in case, for the deep listeners, the main ones are in Vienna that Susan's talking about, the adaptations. The main meaty ones are in Vienna and in the whole, ancestors section where we talk about Billy's backstory and his family's backstory. And then the section in episode 1 about Roz, his mom. That's an adaptation. When Billy and Elizabeth are breaking.
Oh, well,
She's Got Away.
It was going to be Just the Way You Are, but we decided that was probably not right.
She's Got Away, and So It Goes.
Yeah.
And they did a beautiful adaptation, and so you have Billy's melodies. I mean, for people who know Billy's melodies, they will recognize it. For others, they may not realize it. So I just wanted to point it out.
And what was really important to us was that people know that this was the case, and we wanted very much. I really wanted the first thing at the end of the film to say the original score of this film is drawn entirely from Billy Joel's compositions, but we weren't allowed to do it legally because it was a Led Zeppelin, because there was, I said, nobody's going to think he wrote Moonlight Sonata, but
For a whole lot of
for legal reasons, we couldn't do it. And all that beautiful classical music that you're hearing, it's all Billy.
Just an open-ended question. Tell us about Elizabeth, because that was such a huge moment. Even as I learned more, really started digging deep over the last few years, I was like, man, Elizabeth was really instrumental in all this and was just erased. And I don't know how much of that was her own doing as well, but there's just no trace of her. And then to finally have her on camera for the first time talking about any of this was amazing.
When she left, I think she made a vow that she wanted a different life and she wanted to put this life behind her. And she didn't talk about Billy for 40 years. Anytime there was going to be a project, she would make sure she wasn't mentioned. Steve encouraged her to meet with me, and we had several dinners and many long phone conversations until I said, look, nobody's told your story, and you are a really important part of it. I wrote the songs for you. I think you've been unfairly treated in social media. and I want to tell your story. I think it's a feminist story, and I really want to tell that story and show what you did there to help Billy Joel become Billy Joel. And she finally consented. And then we did 4 interviews. And actually we did 3. And then she called me one day and she said, I think I held back a little too much because she didn't want to actually talk about the songs that Billy should talk about, those songs and why he wrote them. I really like Elizabeth a lot. I think she's a real force. I think she's a credible woman with a lot of integrity. And when she said she was going to do this, she put her heart into it and really prepared. She's incredibly well spoken. She was very prepared. And I don't think it was easy. I mean, I think that in some funny way, this whole film has been therapy for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, when she has not spoken publicly once about any of this, I'm sure there was a lot at stake, because like Jack said, she's either been erased or unfairly maligned because Frank's her brother. Finally getting her story on the record certainly brought so much clarity to this. One of my favorite lines in the entire film, and it's really hard to get a line of comedy out of Richie Cannata, but his line of, I don't want to say I was afraid of her, but I was afraid of her, had me rolling.
Yeah. Every of the 1,000 times I've seen that, I laugh. It's like, yeah. And I love it when he says he didn't need meat, boiled meat. He needed pizza, and we were the sauce.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Can you imagine without Elizabeth, what would this first early part of his career story had been? And we knew we wanted to do something real and different and shed a new light on things. And boy, did Elizabeth deliver on that. And also with humor. I mean, now I'd like to talk about one of my favorite songs.
Yeah.
I know. And you're just like, oh, what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
She was wearing this outfit with little spikes all over it.
Right. I was like, that was perfect.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing.
I don't know. I didn't ask her about that, but I was wondering whether there was a bit of unconscious stuff going on there. No, we owe her a great debt. We owe her a really great debt. And then we had no photographs because Billy he had no photographs of his early life or any of that, but she had photographs. And so she started sharing with us, and her son, Sean, was very, very helpful there too. Sean was very helpful. You asked me another thing that was a key to the movie. What for me is when I was interviewing Sean and I asked him whether there had been any closure with Billy, whether Billy had said, hey, I'm sorry we're breaking up, but I hope we stay in touch. And he said, no, Susan, there's no closure with Billy. And then he said, if he could talk about his feelings, probably wouldn't be able to write those songs. And I walked there and I said, that's the key to this movie. It's all in the music.